Hello, dear viewers. This is an hour interview show. I am Grigory Antimony. My today's guest is Yuri Felshtinsky. I'm sure you know him, you've seen him in our shows and many others. Yuri, I'm very happy to see you, especially after you told me about your long trip. And as part of this trip, you were in Jerusalem. And as I understand, you happened to be there on October 7th when all those horrible events happened. That's why your story is very important to us. Yes, I was in Jerusalem on the 7th of October, and by then I spent some time in Israel already, I think a couple of weeks, and it was quite dramatic when it happened. For the first few minutes, nobody understood what was going on. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:07. We were woken up by a siren, and we realized we have to run to a bomb shelter. In all buildings, in all apartments, they have a bomb shelter. It is in fact a special room with reinforced walls. So, not understanding what was really going on, all of us ran to this room. I was with my friends, and since it was a holiday, all their family got together. There were many children, grandchildren, little kids, and all those scared children ran to the bomb shelters. And then over the day, sirens were wailing a few times, and we began to receive some information. And first, there was a hope that it was just a small terrorist attack, but then it turned out that it was a national tragedy, because this terrorist attack is comparable to American 9/11 of 2001. Back then, about 3,500 people died in New York. In this terrorist attack in Israel, terrorists killed 12 or 1,400 people. We don't know exact numbers, but if we compare the size of Israel with the United States, then clearly this terrorist attack is a catastrophe for Israel. Just to give you an idea that during the War of the Judgment Day, Israel lost 3,500 people, and that war is considered the most horrible one. Therefore, I think, in general, what happened, it will have certain consequences. What we see now and know, it is just a beginning of the events that are linked to the 7th of October. And some very significant events will follow.
All around me, and they were going tree by tree and shooting everywhere from two sides. And I saw many people, people were dying, all around. They opened a big van, and all the time they got more weapons from this car. They were in the area for 3 hours. No one was there. No one. No. The policemen from the party, yes, I saw, but they were in one side. Other side, I was sure the army will come. I heard some helicopters. I was sure soldiers are going to come down with robes and go into this field and save us. But no one was there. Just all these terrorists.
Yuri, you've written quite a bit about the Third World War. In your view, what happened in Israel, this conflict of Israel and Hamas, do you think it's just kind of a separate episode of the Middle East drama that's been going on for many years? Or it fits in your concept of the Third World War? Unfortunately, it does fit in this concept, and I will tell you why. Putin has a goal to create a new world order. And as a part of creating this new world order, his real goal is to create a unipolar world. And he keeps blaming Americans for this, that Americans want to create a unipolar world. But in fact, this is Americans who created a multipolar world in 1945. And that world existed until recently. And as a part of creating this unipolar world, Putin's goal is to create a maximum chaos. And as part of creating this maximum chaos, of course, this idea of a conflict or an explosion in the Middle East fits in it very well. As you remember, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014, and it seemed like it was an invasion of Ukraine, an invasion of Europe, and it seemed that it may not go beyond Europe. But then all of a sudden, on the October 1st of 2014, Russian troops landed in Syria. And Russia got involved in the Syrian conflict. Everybody knows, it's not a secret, that Hamas is backed by Iran. But in order to start such an unprecedented, by scale and atrocities, such a terrorist attack, Iran could afford it only because it is backed by Russia. And we started observing this, I mean the building relationship between Iran and Russia, we started observing it since the moment when Iran started shipping drones to Russia to help Russia to fight in Ukraine. But it seemed like a military cooperation. Then we've seen their political cooperation. And then we saw Russia's political cooperation with North Korea. And both countries are trying to become nuclear powers, I mean Iran and North Korea. And then Russia transferred nuclear weapons to Belarus. In fact, Russia is escalating the war. And first of all, it does it to make it global. Many people thought that the Russo-Ukrainian conflict could be local, but sadly it is becoming international. And I think the connection is like this. Hamas, that is backed by Iran, Iran, that is backed by Russia, Russia, that is backed by China. And this, sadly, creates a probability of quite a serious conflict. Maybe I was one of the first ones, or maybe the first one who started talking about the Third World War, and I started talking about it in 2014 when Russia's troops entered Crimea. But now it's clearly seen that we are right in the threshold of the Third World War. And looking back, we can tell that the Second World War, we can look at it in detail, we can analyze it in detail, and we can see what stages of the beginning of that war were. And now it seems similar. I hope we will manage to avoid it, but if we don't, then all these events, the events of 2008, the invasion of Georgia, 2014 invasion of Ukraine, 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the 7th of October terrorist attack in Israel, Later, we will be describing these events as the beginning of the Third World War, and each of these events will have a chapter. Yuri, I spoke with my friends and family in Israel, and almost all of them, to a certain degree, they underline a few important moments in their view. They say, as a result of this drama, of this tragedy, they lost their faith in the best army in the world and in one of the best intelligence in the world. This is one point. And the second one is that many times they were assured that a certain friendship of Israel government, I mean Netanyahu and Putin, it was a certain guarantee or a shield against the invasion of Arab countries or such organizations as Hezbollah or Hamas, because in the past the Soviet Union or Russia, they were controlling those organizations. And what we learned from the media, from TV and press, they were saying that it's good for Israel. Maybe it's bad for the relationship with other countries, but for us it was important. And Netanyahu was kind of building this relationship with Putin, and he was getting certain guarantees from Putin. What do you think about it? I think that Netanyahu did a disservice to Israel during that period when he was absolutely openly and actually quite humiliating for himself. He kept good relationship with Putin. But I have to say that Netanyahu was not the only one who was doing this, because he just stayed in power for quite a while and everybody could see him. He flew to Moscow many times on the Victory Day on the 9th of May to walk with Putin on the street with a portrait of his grandfather. But in fact, Netanyahu didn't know what else to do to keep this friendship with Putin. And I have to tell you, he was trying to do it on the personal level, not only on the governmental level. And he thought that it might save Israel from certain problems. Otherwise, that Israel would have to deal with these problems. For example, Russia was strengthening its stand in Syria, and it could use its position in Syria against Israel. But as we can see today, it doesn't save Israel. With such people like Putin, nothing will help you, because Putin has this global strategic goal, and the rest for him is like a special operation to recruit agents. And from the point of view of Putin, he managed to recruit Netanyahu. I would say that the 7th of October, in many ways, is a payment for being too political. I mean that the Israeli government was fighting over the power. And when you fight over the power, naturally, the security issues kind of pushed back. So that's why it's not accidental that it happened. And actually, it happened against a backdrop of an incredible dissociation of the Israeli society. And it's also linked to Netanyahu's policies. Of course, the whole thing is not accidental. I think that some time will pass, and I don't think it's going to be a significant time. Actually, a lot depends on how the following events will be unfolding. It may happen that the 7th of October is just a beginning of a whole cascade of attacks. At least Israel has to be ready for that. I don't know if Israel is getting ready for that or not. Maybe Israel knows answer to this question, whether Iran has the nuclear weapons or not, because it may seem that Iran afforded this incredible audacious act not only because Iran relies on Russia, but also Iran may have this military confidence that they already have the nuclear weapons. And if Iran produced nuclear weapons and finished its nuclear program relying on Russia, Israel has to keep it in mind when it tackles issues related to its independence. Because clearly that after the 7th of October you can't hope for the mercy of the enemy. So that's why I would like to underline that the events of the 7th of October may have quite serious consequences for Israeli-Iranian relations and for the whole Middle East. The bitterness on both sides is very high, but no matter how bitter they are on both sides, they need to do their best to minimize casualties among the civilians. I'm utterly outraged when I hear that the Russian president says that everything must be done to minimize casualties among the civilians during the military conflicts. There is nothing more cynical than that. In Putin's view, of course, it's a quite successful burning new conflict that on the one hand they think in Russia that it will distract the United States from helping Ukraine, and on the other hand it will show the United States and Europe that it is important to build relationships with Russia. Otherwise, Russia is able to organize a whole series of hotspots of wars across the world. But as it always goes with Putin, he has one plan, but a political outcome is completely different as a result of such an operation. And I think that the result will be contrary to what he expects. Well, first of all, after the 7th of October, everybody realized what is the sequence of events. I think that everybody understands that there is a certain connection between the Russian war in Ukraine and this starting to burn conflict in the Middle East. And if it is so, then I hope that everybody should be clear that the spearhead of this global chaos is Putin's Russia. And yes, the regime in Russia must be changed, and I'm not saying it is easy to do. Yes, you can make a decision to change the regime in Russia, and the regime will change. No, but at least if you have this idea, then there will be understanding of the problem. And I think this understanding is present. And when I was in Berlin after the 7th of October, the whole city of Berlin is decorated with the flags of Ukraine and the flag of Israel. It means that for the Germans, the connection is obvious. And if this connection is clear for the Germans, then it will be clear for everybody. But I have to say the Germans who experienced Nazism and the Second World War, they see more clearly this type of connections. Okay, I would like to ask you another question. How would you explain this? This wave of, say, not really pro-Palestinian protesters. There was a huge rally in London, 500,000 people. And it was quite a strange mix of this crowd. In a different life, these people would never probably meet. But when you see in one rally pro-Hamas people and university professors, and it's not only in London, it's just in general, see this mix of Western intellectuals and Hamas, LGBT activists and Hamas. How is it possible to see them all together in the same rally? How to understand this? Anti-Semitism, as we know, is an ancient thing, roughly speaking 2,000 years. Anti-Israel sentiments appeared on the day of the foundation of Israel. This is in 1948. The mindset of the Arab world, if we put aside diplomacy and hypocrisy, is that the state of Israel should be destroyed. The mindset of extremists and terrorists is that in addition to destroying Israel, all those people who live on the territory of Israel should be gutted. And we saw the implementation of this mindset on the 7th of October, how it was done. They just demonstrated it. So it wasn't some theoretical concern or theoretical assumption that they're going to destroy the state of Israel. They're talking not only about the state of Israel, they're talking about the people who live in Israel. They want to annihilate them too. And actually that's the same mindset that Putin has. Putin wants to destroy the sovereignty of Ukraine. He may not say that he wants to kill all Ukrainians. He plans to kill half of Ukrainians, and all others he will declare Russians and will include them in the Russian state. There are lots of parallels here. Parallels that we have in our minds after the terrorist attack of the 7th of October. Just like with Putin and Ukraine, they constantly discuss a possibility to start negotiations and to cease fire. The same with Israeli-Arab conflict. They constantly talk about negotiations, the cease of fire, the beginning of the war, the end of the war, new wars. People get Nobel Prizes for finishing another war, and then the whole thing starts all over again. Because the problem is much more serious than every military conflict that Israel faces. Sadly, Israel is in the state of eternal war for its existence. And this existence includes the people who live on this land. They need to fight for their survival. And this conflict seems to be eternal. And I think that for Israelis, it's generally understandable that the conflict is eternal, and every time they're trying to solve the problem how to minimize their losses. There is another matter that I would like to touch on in connection with the events. Don't you think that it is again when we lost our trust in a whole number of organizations, beginning with UN, with the UN Security Council, UNESCO, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all these structures that were supposed to protect us, prevent something, support us, and somehow the whole thing kind of broke down. Don't you think? I don't know whether many people actually had any trust in these organizations, such organizations as UN, the organization that could prevent a war or catastrophe, atrocities. We can see every day that the UN is absolutely powerless, let alone that political philosophy of the UN oftentimes could have been better and could have been more fair. And I think it's inevitable because in the Security Council of the UN there are at least two countries, such as Russia and China, with a veto right, and often their interests don't conform with the interests of the founders of the UN, with those who are trying to create an organization that would help to mitigate conflicts, to manage conflicts in a peaceful way. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen. And again, Russia's philosophy today is absolutely clear and open. Russia is trying to create as much chaos as possible. And everything that is happening fits this plan, so to speak. For example, the attempt to organize an artificial famine in Africa through stopping Ukrainian grain export, so that crowds of hungry, desperate Africans would rush to Europe and provoke another immigration crisis in Europe. And the result of it, right-wing parties will come in power in each European country, and these parties would vote for their countries to leave the European Union. This is the logic. Because Russia has the goal to destroy the European Union. Or, for example, Trump, who becomes a real political figure again for the next presidential election. And he already stated that he will withdraw the United States from Europe. He will withdraw the United States from being engaged in the European problems, European issues, let alone the war. Russia is setting up quite concrete and strategic goals, and then on the tactical level, it is trying to realize those goals. And one of these serious goals is, and this goal is to create this global chaos, this global disaster. And I would like to underscore that the Middle East fits into this picture. Sadly, as always in such cases, Russia gets allies. Some become such allies because of their stupidity. Some, as in the case of Israel, because of this anti-Semitism. And some, because for them it is more comfortable to live with an idea that there is this global justice, and Arabs and Israelis, they should live in peace, and to make them love each other, since we can't rebuild the Arab world, so we can rebuild Israeli world and make Israelis agree with the principles of the Arab world. But the Arab world has a pretty banal philosophy. And the philosophy is that Israel should be erased from existence. And it is hard for me to find an answer to the question why left intellectuals assume that the Arab world can be allowed to take up Israel, and how they find peace with the idea that here we're talking about the physical annihilation of a whole nation. Why many intellectuals agree with this concept? I can't understand it, because it seems, yes, to resolve this issue in Israel, Israel should be destroyed. That seemed to them as the only way to resolve Israeli-Arab conflict that exists in this territory, because there is no any other option to resolve this conflict, because this conflict has very deep roots, and those roots, they grow into the ages. And I have a follow-up question to you. I wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of the leftists in the modern world? And I think what you spoke about actually has to do with their idea of justice. And by the way, about anti-Semitism, I spoke to an acquaintance of mine, and I told him that such protests as in London, and when 500,000 people went on the streets, and this is an expression of anti-Semitism of many ages, and it's very well transformed in the modern world into hatred of Israel. And he told me, so you know, in that crowd that was walking through London, those who were supporting Hamas, they were the same people who were supporting Ukraine. And frankly, I had nothing to say in response to him. I'm not sure that this is so, and it's hard for me to argue that, but I'm not sure that there are parallels between the fight of Ukraine for its independence and the fight of Hamas. Yuri, I'm sorry, this is what I wanted to say. I'm not talking about parallels. I'm talking about similarities in this leftist thinking. Yes, I understand. But at the same time, we know that there are many leftists who are taking a pro-Russian stand, as well as rightists who take a pro-Russian stand. For me, it's very difficult to generalize and judge everybody, because I think everybody has their own justifications for either policy, either philosophy. But I think that obviously we deal either with anti-Semitism or with anti-Israeli sentiments. Let me give you a couple of examples. After the terrorist attack of Hamas, some countries were outraged, some governments were extending their condolences. Turkey didn't express any condolences. But when a rocket allegedly exploded near a Palestinian hospital, and first they thought it was an Israeli rocket, and then it turned out it was a Palestinian rocket, it just didn't reach Israeli territory. And there was some information that 500 people died in this strike. Erdogan, president of Turkey, he declared a 3-day period of mourning. Mourning for those 500 people. He didn't declare mourning after the terrorist attack of 7th of October. He declared mourning after the rocket exploded near the Palestinian hospital. Well, first of all, it turned out that the rocket is not Israeli, it is Palestinian, and it wasn't 500 people that died, and it was much less. First they said it was 300, then 200, and recently, according to American data, about 40 people died in that strike. So, but see, this different attitude to the victims tells you something. Yet one might think that this attitude should be the same. And I think that this is the main issue of these people. Regarding the large-scale pro-Arab rallies, this is what we should not forget, that over the last few decades, Europe was flooded by many people from Muslim countries. That's why, in quantities, all these rallies are supported by immigrants from the Arab world countries, and not by some leftists, some British leftists, who just join this mass movement. And I would like to underline that there is an assumption that Israel is supposed to live according to some different laws. And I think that Israel would be happy to live according to some different laws, but Israel doesn't have this option, because Israel is constantly in the state of war. And PR campaigns, Israel always loses them, because the only situation when Israel actually wins in a PR campaign, this is when innocent Jews are killed. The 7th of October, we may say that Israel was winning the PR campaign on that date, because innocent people, civilians, were killed. And I don't think that leftist Brits would go to a rally to support Palestinians in this case. It wouldn't be appropriate. But I have to say that in Arab countries and even in Arab settlements in Israel, this news were taken positively. But when Israel is striking back, here they have an excuse to traditionally blame Israel for killing civilians, but actually to tell who is a civilian, who is not, in the country where since their childhood people are raised to hate Israel. And here we have a country that doesn't have a military uniform for its militants. And let's be frank, the press, the media, is not always objective. And they don't really take a lot of effort to explain who is considered a child. And it's very difficult actually to determine who is a child, because according to the Western standards, a person up to 18 years old can be still a child, and in some countries even 21-year-old is a child. But at the same time we have to say that Hamas starts recruitment of the boys of 14, 15 and 16 years old. And CNN and BBC, they don't take a lot of effort to explain to their audience that despite the fact that according to British standards, a child is a person of 18 years old, but according to Hamas standards, 18 years old is already a fighter with a machine gun. And the Israeli army can't consider these people children when you have a military confrontation. The same is applied to victims. Israel is trying to be as precise as possible in determining how people were killed on both sides, which we can't say about the Arab side when we talk about Gaza Strip, because there, the bigger the number of the losses, the greater will be the outrage of the Western world. And when we read CNN news, when they say that the losses of both sides are so and so, for example, Israel says it's 1,451 persons are dead on the Israeli side, and in Gaza Strip 10,000 people were dead. And this is according to the people who count the victims, who count the losses of both countries. But in Israel, they accurately count their losses, whereas the Arab side is interested in inflating this number, and CNN doesn't explain it to its audience. In this situation, when we say that Israel is losing in the PR war, then of course it is losing it, because Israel does not participate in this PR war, because Israel thinks that this goal, to inform, this is the goal and the objective of free press that we have in the UK, in the US, in France, in Germany. But sadly, since in this free press, in this free media, there are people who can't be pro-Israel because they'll be fired next day, then obviously they have this natural selection. For them, it's easier to stay on the pro-Arab position, and it's much easier for them, and it's safer for them, and they can't take Israelis' position. It's impossible for them, because as a minimum, their boss wouldn't tolerate that. And because of that, we have a distorted picture. It seems that terrorist attack was against Israel, and in this case, civilians, children, and women were killed. I'm not going to describe how they did that. Yeah, that was outrageous. But nevertheless, Israel turns out to be the country to blame, because Israel is kind of responsible. And theoretical and psychological question is, what would have happened if Israel wouldn't have responded to this attack? What if Israel didn't do anything? That's very hard to imagine, by the way. Yes, it is hard to imagine. But at the same time, I think that none of those people would change their opinion about Israel. Let's be frank about it. I'm not talking about military and political consequences of this inaction of Israel, if it was. But I say that none of those people who went to protest, I don't think that they would say that how good Jews are. And I love Jews so much now, because they allowed to be killed and they didn't respond to the terrorist attack. For some reason, I think that nobody would change their opinion about Israel, about Jews, and about the events that are going on. That's what I think. So, Israel, unfortunately, is like a passive element in this whole scheme. It's like nothing depends on Israel, because no matter what Israel does, in any case, it will provoke protests and outrage among the international community. Let's be frank, that the majority is not in favor of Israel. Okay, nothing good in this, but what is your forecast of this situation? Well, clearly, Palestinians, they have hostages. And here I would like to refer to those protests. I don't think that those people were carrying banners that were saying that Israelis that were taken hostage by Palestinians should be freed. With all their love for humanity, I don't remember that those banners were saying that this love actually covers those who are taken hostage. Yet, there are children among those hostages, and women, and old people. And now I think they'll try to delay time and to delay the process of exchange of hostages for Palestinians. And what's going to happen after this process is over, we'll see. Israel took a serious hit, and I think it will take some time for it to recover after it. There will be consequence domestically, because as soon as the conflict is over or the war is over, they will immediately start investigation to find out who is guilty of what happened. And I'm sure those who are guilty will be found and they will be punished. And I must say that it will take a while for Israeli society to recover from this attack. We will see what decisions will be made by the political and military leadership of Israel regarding this attack. And here we mean those people who are behind this attack. I mean countries and people. Let's see what Israel will do and what resources Israel has for that. And this issue is far from trivial because it has to do with nuclear weapons too. Theoretically speaking, do you see a way out from this situation to the state of peace? If you mean Israeli-Arab conflict, then no. Look at what happened in South Africa. It seemed that everything that the society wanted, they wanted that the system of apartheid would be removed, would be cancelled. And it was right. It was kind of uncomfortable to live in an apartheid system in the 20th century. But as a result of this, what the society asked for, they wanted the white population to leave Africa, whatever it takes. And as a result of this, they destroyed that South Africa that existed for the 20th century. This is what happened, and it seemed that it was a pretty clear thing to ask for, to cancel apartheid. But in reality, what happened, they cancelled the South Africa that existed. The same with Israel. It seems that they're asking for creating an Arab state. And let's be frank, that this requirement is written in the documents of 1948. In those documents, founding documents of Israel. So not only Israel would be created, but also an Arab state. And yes, that Arab state was not created. And it wasn't created because Since 1948, Israel is in a state of war, constant wars. And it seems that Israel wins all those wars and even takes over some territories. But because all those takeovers are not recognized by anyone, those military victories don't bring the situation to stability and to peace in the Middle East. And the Arab world insisting on creating Palestinian state. They also assume that this state will be founded within the borders and within the territory that were either taken over by Israel as a result of those many wars, or were not taken over, but just Jews happened to be living there. But Israel doesn't agree to give its consent to create a Palestinian state under these conditions, because they understand in Israel that it will worsen the strategic position, and they understand that Israel will be obliterated and all people will be killed in Israel. Look at the situation in Ukraine. It's mirroring the situation in Israel. Different people discuss this idea that peace could be exchanged for territories. Israel can do that because theoretically Israel is ready to give up some territories, but Israel understands that it can't get peace for that. They will get just another war under less favorable conditions. And the same with Ukraine. You can discuss peace in exchange for territories for as long as you want, but Putin doesn't offer Ukraine peace under any conditions. So that's why Ukraine has nothing to agree with. Ukraine doesn't have a chance to give up part of its territories and get peace. So they gave up Crimea and they didn't get peace. You can give up something else, but you won't get peace anyway. And in this regard, I think when you compare Israeli-Arab conflict and Russo-Ukrainian war, some things become clearer, because with an example of a different country, things become more clear. Yuri, sadly, our time is up, and I would like to say goodbye to our viewers. Though we'll continue our conversation with Yuri Felshtinsky, historian, writer, and for now, goodbye and see you soon.